So, good morning. Happy New Year from me. It's the time of year when we make New Year's resolutions. And I made one. I decided I need to read more this year. So I've turned on the titles on the television. But it's good that we make New Year's resolutions. What it shows is that we want to improve. We want to be better people, and that's great. And so today I'm going to give 3 ways that I can think of that bring about change in us. I'm mainly going to talk about the third one, but I can think of 3. The first is New Year's resolutions. It's the power of the will. I make a decision and I stick to it by the power of the will. Now, it's very common to make fun of New Year's resolutions. They'll all be forgotten by the 30th of January. I think that's a great pity, because the human ability to make decisions and stick to them separates us from the animals, and I think is one of the things that makes us in the image of God. So don't ever underestimate the power of the will. I saw it in a negative way in one woman, where she came into my office in her 40s, and she told me that when I was in Standard 3, Grade 5, I revealed something in class that was private, and the class laughed, and the teacher laughed. And I decided there and then I would never share anything private again. Now, that's, of course, a fatal decision. So it's not surprising that in her 40s she was in my office with depression, because she learned to suppress everything private. But what a power of the will in Grade 5 to make a decision and stick to it for 30 years. The power of the will. That's number 1. Don't underestimate that. Number 2 is simply make a practical change in your life. That will bring about change. For example, I was an inveterate biter of my nails, and I never conquered it by the power of my will. I conquered it by keeping nail clippers on my keyring. And I've never bitten my nails again. As soon as I feel an edge, I can cut it. I can never remember to take my morning pill. One of many, but most I take in the evening, as I'm an old man now. I could not remember that morning one, and you know what changed it? I just put my box of pills in my cereal box. Now I never forget. So if you're a compulsive impulse buyer, get rid of your credit card and never go shopping without your husband. So the power of the will and practical changes that can bring about change in our lives. But the third one is the one I want really to talk about. It arises from what today is. Now, I thought of bringing chocolates for the person who can guess, but I didn't buy them because I know it. You're Baptists, you won't. Because we don't follow the church calendar much. We do Christmas and Easter, sometimes Palm Sunday. But actually today is the 3rd oldest date in the church calendar. And Anglicans all over the world are celebrating this today. Anybody know what it is? Second Sunday in January. I knew I'm dealing with a bunch of... And today, some of you can't even say the word, and many of you don't even know what it means, is Epiphany Sunday. Epiphany Sunday. Now, Epiphany is the 6th of January. That is 12th night. You've heard of that? Oh dear. Shakespeare, you've heard of Shakespeare? 12th night is the night that you're supposed to take down your Christmas decorations. They should be down, 6th of January. Epiphany Sunday is always the Sunday after that. So 8th of January. I wonder how many of you can remember where you were 27 years ago today. It was also a Sunday, the 8th of January. I can. We were in Fishhook Anglican Church. I was about to go to Westville and take up my ministry there. And the service was led by a little old spindly Anglican priest. I think he must have been retired. I actually saw him the next day in town wearing short trousers, and it really was a mistake. Those spindly little legs with knobbly knees, he shouldn't have. But anyway, this little retired Anglican priest, 27 years later, I can still remember a sentence he said. What's the point of a Holy Spirit if he never does anything? And then he invited anyone who wanted to come forward to the rail for prayer, for a touch from the Holy Spirit. Now, Anglicans are much more used to coming forward to the rail than we are, and I really enjoyed the way Paul did communion last week, where we came forward to receive our communion. The Anglicans are readier to come forward to the rail, and quite a number went forward, and I went forward because beginning this new ministry in 2 weeks' time. And this little man came around. He arrived at me. He didn't know me from Adam. He prayed a few sentences in English, a few sentences in tongues, and moved on. I didn't feel any tingling down my spine or anything. But I must say, in the first years at Westville, any blessings we received, and we did, I would think back to that spindly old Anglican priest. So that was Epiphany Sunday 27 years ago. I can remember the Bible reading. Now that's not so difficult because this Bible reading will be read all over the world this morning. In Anglican, many Methodist, many Presbyterian, many Catholic churches. You know it very well. I learned it off by heart as a child. I'm going to try and say it to you now, but I'll say it, if you don't mind, in the King James Version, which is what I learned it in. It's Matthew chapter 2, verses 1 to 12. After Jesus was born in Bethlehem of Judea, wise men came from the east to Jerusalem, saying, "Where is he that is born King of the Jews? For we have come to worship him." When Herod heard this, he was deeply troubled, and all Jerusalem with him. Then he called the chief priests and the teachers of the law to him and asked them where the Messiah was to be born. And they said, "Bethlehem of Judea, for it is written in the prophet, 'Thou, Bethlehem, in the land of Judah, you are not the least among the princes of Judah, for out of you will come a ruler that will lead my people Israel.'" Then Herod secretly called the wise men to him and inquired of them exactly the time that the star had appeared. Then he said to them, "Go and search diligently for the young child. And when you find him, bring me news again that I may worship him also." After they had heard Herod, the wise men left the palace, and the star that had gone before them went ahead until it came and stood over the place where the young child was. And when they went into the house, they saw the babe with Mary, his mother, and they fell down and worshipped him. Then they opened their treasures and gave him gifts of gold, frankincense, and myrrh. And being warned in a dream not to go back to Herod, they went home by another way. Now, if I can just make a few comments on this passage, then I want to talk at the end about Epiphany. Firstly, I notice it was wise men from the east. Now we think that that was Babylon, 1,000 miles to the east. They were not Jews. They were not in the in-group. And yet the light of the gospel reached out to them. And so what Epiphany is for, if you look in the church calendar, it's the celebration of the coming of the gospel to the Gentiles. And so that's what you right now say, thank you, Lord. That was very impressive. Thank you, Lord, that the gospel came to us. But here's the irony. We are now the in-group. And perhaps today, not just to be thankful that the gospel came to us, but to be concerned for those who are the out-group now. We were very privileged in Hermanus. We spent 3 years there, and they were in the last years of a wonderful woman named Lorna Eglin. Now, those of my age will remember Colin Eglin, the leader of the PFP. I think Lorna was more remarkable than her brother. When Lorna was a little girl, she was in Sunday school, and a missionary came to talk to them. The missionary took out a bag of sweets and handed them out to half of the children, and then put the bag of sweets away. And he then asked those who had not got how they felt. Well, the answer was obvious. He then asked the other children how they felt, and by and large they said, "Great, thank you." Very few of them said, "We're worried about them." By the way, my granddaughter, if I give her anything, will say, "What about Callum?" And that concept of the left out ones, the phrase the missionary used, was a moment that changed Lorna's life. She did her training and eventually ended up giving 50 years of her life in Kenya in ministry to the girls. I've forgotten her Swahili name, but it was the mother of the girls. We were with her on her 80th birthday. She received a letter from the president of Kenya, signed by him, and the heading was, "To the mother of the girls," because she became so deeply touched by the concept of the left out ones. And so these came from the east. They were the left out ones, but they saw the star. I believe that every human being in the world has the capacity to see spiritual things, whether just by conscience or an inner prompting or by nature. And so any friend you have, maybe they're pushing it down, but every single one has an ability to discern the things of God and to long for them. Well, these wise men came to Jerusalem. The Bible doesn't say it, but my own feeling is that was one moment where the wise men were not so wise. Now, you can understand it. Let me give you a map, okay? Can you imagine a map here? Here is Babylon. 1,000 miles away, there is Jerusalem by the Mediterranean Sea, and Bethlehem just south of it. Now, you would never go straight across because that's all desert, almost an impossible journey. So they would always go north along the Euphrates River and then across the foot of the mountains on what's called the Fertile Crescent, and then you would come down into Israel from the north through Syria. So the star would have had to lead them around that way and come in from the north, and naturally would have to go through Jerusalem to get to Bethlehem. But when it got to Jerusalem, I think they took their eye off the star. And they jumped to the natural conclusion, King of the Jews, it must be Jerusalem. We have to be so careful of jumping to conclusions. The obvious may not be God's way. And so they went into the palace, and I presume they spent a few days there because it was quite a lengthy story. I think we need to be careful of being too much in the palace of Herod. By that I mean too concerned, too focused on the things of this world. And you all have your private problems. Just making a living, just paying the bond, your children, you all have your private problems. And then we have public problems, and we have plenty of those. Whether it's potholes, or power cuts, or corruption in government, very worrying things. But they were too much with their eyes on the things of Herod. But they left Herod and then looked up at the star, and the star moved again. Now here's the question, what was the star doing while they were messing around in the courts of Herod? I think the star just stood still and waited. And I think there's a spiritual truth there, that there are times, yes, when we are too much involved in the things of Herod and we take our eyes off. And God stops leading us. Sometimes we wonder why. But he waits till we come out again. When we were newlyweds, in our first month, someone gave us a white Labrador puppy. Apart from the fact that it was a hair shedder of note, and we had to wear suits in those days, it was a disaster. She was the best dog, not just we've ever had, I've ever known. I taught her a trick in seconds. I taught her to shut the door in literally a minute. From there on, I'm sitting watching TV. We didn't have TV yet. And sitting by the fire, felt a draft on my neck. I would just say, shut the door, Sedge. She'd get up, get behind it, pull it out, and then slam it with all her might. She loved doing that. Wonderful dog. We gave it to my mother because 10 years later, my mother was living alone. To get to the shops, my mother had to cross a double, very busy intersection, 2 lanes each. She wouldn't take a lead, because if you said to Sedge, heel, she wouldn't leave your knee until you told her she could. Cross the road, building society. Come to the building society, stay, Sedge. Sedge would stay. Mom would come out of the building society, go to Pick and Pay. Stay, Sedge. Mom would go in to do her shopping, could take half an hour. One day, my mom met a friend in Pick and Pay, said, oh, hello, let's go for coffee. And they went for coffee, and she forgot all about the dog. Hour later, comes out, and there's Sedge waiting. Perhaps it's not for nothing that dog is God spelled backwards. A God who waits for us. So they come out of the palace, they see the star, it then moves again, comes and stays over the place where the young child was. And they went in and fell down and worshipped him. If you're looking for a New Year's resolution, there's one. This year I'm going to worship better. I'm busy putting together probably 30 playlists of 4 songs each, Christian songs, to play when I do my exercises, just to help me worship better. And note that when worshiping, they took out gifts and gave. What a difference it would make if people didn't come to church saying, what can I get out of it? But what can I put into it? Come to worship as a gift. And of course, worship isn't just Sunday morning. Then lastly, we see that they went home by another way. Sometimes we do things again and again and again, and we're not getting anywhere. My mother taught me that she'd teach you, as she taught Neville Chamberlain, if at first you don't succeed, try again. That's the dumbest thing I ever heard. Why do you keep on trying the same thing again and again and it's not succeeding? No, if at first you don't succeed, stop. Reflect on why you're not succeeding and try again. And so it may be there's something in someone's life here. You've just been going on and on and on at something and it's not working. You need to go home by another way. So much for the wise men. I've left out one verse, the most important verse for today. The verse is, when they came out from Herod's palace and looked up, they saw the star, and they rejoiced with exceeding great joy. Now, there's something funny here. That star has led them, you remember, probably for 3 months, all the way up the Euphrates River, across the Fertile Crescent, down through Syria, eventually to Jerusalem. They saw it every day, or at least every night. But suddenly, when they come out of Herod's palace and see it again, remember their eyes have been off it, they were filled with exceeding great joy. Suddenly, the thing that they'd seen every night, they saw. And that's called Epiphany. When you see something like you didn't see it before. It's a revelation. It's a realization. It's an epiphany. And it's a gift from God. Possibly don't get it more than 2 or 3 times in a lifetime. But if you've had one, don't waste it. Let me give you 2 examples of epiphany. In my 30s, I started to develop spots in front of my eyes, little black spots. I went to a specialist. He looked in my eye. He said, it's little congealings of the jelly of your eye. And if I looked with my eyes closed, I could see there were little bubbles. And it annoyed me. Every time it was always worse in the bright light, a white wall, I would look at the spots. And they would slowly drift down my vision. I'd do this and they'd drift down again. Preoccupied me so much. And then we were very privileged to be in a plane flying across from Switzerland to Italy over the Alps, one of the great sights of the world. And I'm sitting at the window looking at this amazing sight. But it was very bright, of course. By the way, it's not nearly as bright now as it was 35 years ago. Not nearly as much snow. But with this bright light, all I could see were these jolly dots. I was feeling really down. I'm only 35, and he says it'll get worse. And then I had an epiphany. Well, I can describe it as a little voice somewhere back here that said, Andrew, why don't you look at what you can see instead of at the dots? It changed like that. I still have them. They are worse. If I look at the window now, yes, there they all are. I don't think of them for months on end. God didn't heal the spots, but he healed my mind and healed the problem. That's epiphany. Now, another one, many of you will know it, but I'll repeat it, is Peter Pollock, the great South African fast bowler, the father of Sean, was a real man's man. I remember him. He was a tough cookie. And he had no time for religion in his life. But his wife gave her life to Jesus, started going to church. Now, he didn't mock her directly, but he would take every opportunity to point out what was wrong with what she was doing. One day, he actually made a kind of sneering joke about Jesus. And for the only time in their marriage, he saw her weep. And he knew that Jesus was off limits. One night, she was getting ready for church Sunday night, and he was sitting in the lounge, and the television was on. We didn't have many channels in those days. And a program came on called Cross Questions. Anyone remember that? It was a discussion program about religion. And they had various members there. And they had one who was the representative of the atheists. I won't mention his name, but he was overweight with heavy jowls and eyelids that drooped, bald. He was actually an expert on food, and his overweightness actually showed that, and an atheist. And for the first 10 minutes, he just gave every reason why Christianity was rubbish, with this harsh, sneering face and voice. And Peter called to his wife and said, "Come and look here. See what he's saying? That's what I've been trying to tell you." He didn't see her cry, but she left, got in the car, and went off to church, probably in tears. And he sat slumped in his chair with his beer, watching this program. And then he had an epiphany. A voice in the back of his head said, "See that ugly man? That's you." And it changed everything. He put on his beer, he turned off the television, he went down to the bottom of the garden and gave his life to Jesus. Changed everything. That's Epiphany. It's God-given. It's a wonderful thing. The problem with Epiphany is you can't produce it. You can't make it happen to yourself. The preacher can't make it happen to people. Because believe me, if I could, I would. I reckon if a preacher gets someone with an epiphany once a month, he'll be doing very well. Can't produce it. Now, you could have had an epiphany today. You could have had an epiphany that I really don't care enough about the left out ones. But if you want to do something about that, come to me. I'll give you the name of people who will give you a book or a website that will enable you to pray about a different country every day of the month. You may have an epiphany about, I'm just doing the obvious thing. I'm just repeating the same thing over and over. I need to make a change. You may have an epiphany about, I'm too much in the courts of Herod. I spent so much time moaning about the government. And I don't spend enough time looking at the star. Very early on, Peter Pollock, he never told his wife in those early days, didn't tell anybody. But he used to sneak little things out of his wife's bedside Bible when she wasn't looking. And one of them was a list of 30 sins that you need to get hold of. And he just looked through them and he said, that's hopeless. I do them all. So he phoned surreptitiously the counselor at the church that had led his wife to the Lord. And he said, listen, I found this list in my wife's Bible. And he read them to her. He said, that's hopeless. I can't buy into that. I'll never get rid of those. She was a very wise counselor. She said, Peter, what have you done? Have you given your life to Jesus? For the first time in his life, he admitted, yes. She gave this wonderful advice. She said, throw away that list and keep your eyes on Jesus. And you could have had an epiphany today that I need to do that. And God will show you how. You could have had an epiphany about worship. You could have had an epiphany that I need to do something a different way. Wonderful gift. So what about the rest of us who haven't had an epiphany this morning or for quite a while? What do? Well, here's my concluding suggestion. Let's go back to number 1. Use the power of the will to make a decision, New Year's resolution if you like, for this year. I can't tell you what yours should be, but here's a suggestion. To see thee more clearly, to love thee more dearly, to follow thee more nearly, day by day.